What happens when a predator meets a monster? It can't fight. Deep in the emerald gloom of the woods, a lioness lay dying, strangled by a silver serpent of man-made malice. Her mate knew he couldn't break the snare alone, so he did the unthinkable. He went to find the only creature who could. This is the breathtaking story of a high-stakes rescue and the supernatural trust between a lawman and a legend. Chapter 1. The Shadow at the Threshold. The morning air in the valley didn't just feel cold, it felt heavy, as if the very atmosphere were holding its breath in anticipation of a catastrophe. Sergeant Thomas Thorne was a man who preferred the company of ancient oaks to the chatter of the village, a man whose soul was tuned to the subtle, humming frequencies of the forest. He lived in a small stone cottage at the edge of the wild, where the garden was less a lawn and more a polite negotiation with the encroaching briars. He was finishing a cup of tea, the steam curling into the rafters, and a shadow fell across his porch. A shadow so vast and jagged it seemed to swallow the morning light. It wasn't the flickering shadow of a bird or the soft silhouette of a deer. This was something solid, ancient, and immensely powerful. Thorne froze. The porcelain cup midway to his lips, as the hair on the back of his neck rose like iron filings to a magnet. Standing there, not 10 paces from his door, was a creature of myth, a male lion. He was a magnificent, terrifying sight, his mane a tangled crown of amber and shadow matted with the red dust of the far plains. He did not belong in this temperate valley, yet he stood there with the authority of a king visiting a distant province. He was a sovereign out of place, a golden monument of muscle and grief. But the lion wasn't there to hunt, and he wasn't there to claim a trophy. His presence lacked the predatory heat Thorne had spent his life identifying. Instead, the beast's eyes held a desperate amber fire, a look of such profound human-like pleading that it sent a jolt of ice through Thorne's veins. It was a grief too heavy for a beast to bear, a silent scream for help that resonated through the floorboards. Any other man would have reached for a rifle, but Thorne felt a strange magnetic pull, a tug at his navel that felt like a summons from a high court. He watched as the lion let out a low, vibrating huff of air, a sound that wasn't a growl, but a desperate request for attention. The beast's tail flicked with an anxious, rhythmic thud against the wooden porch, each beat echoing the ticking of a clock. The lion turned toward the deep emerald gloom of the woods, pausing at the tree line to see if the human would follow. It was a bridge built across the ancient, yawning gap between species, a silent invitation to step out of the world of man and into the realm of legends. Thorne set his cup down with a steady hand, knowing that to stay inside was to deny the very spirit of the wild he claimed to protect. Chapter 2. A Language of the Wild. Thorne grabbed his heavy medical kit and a pair of industrial steel cutters, his movements fueled by a sudden, frantic clarity. He stepped off his porch and into the wake of the lion, feeling the air change as he crossed the threshold of the forest. The emerald gloom of the woods felt thicker today, the sunlight struggling to pierce the canopy, falling in dusty, golden shafts that looked like bars of a cage. The lion moved with a focused, silent grace, his massive paws barely disturbing the carpet of pine needles. He didn't look back often, but when he did, his gaze was sharp and impatient, urging Thorne to move faster. The forest seemed to acknowledge their passing. The chatter of squirrels died away, and the wind held its breath, leaving the two travelers in a bubble of eerie, expectant silence. As they pushed deeper into the thicket, the trees grew gnarled and ancient, their roots coiling like sleeping dragons beneath the earth. Thorne felt as though he were walking through the pages of a forgotten history book. The lion was no longer just an animal. He was a guide, a herald leading a commoner to the heart of a kingdom in crisis. The weight of the moment pressed against Thorne's chest like a physical hand. The sounds of the modern world, the distant hum of a tractor, the whistle of a train, faded into a muffled memory. Here in the green shadows, the only reality was the rhythmic thud of the lion's gait and the frantic drumming of Thorne's own heart. He realized that he was being tested, his every step a proof of his worthiness to witness the secrets of the wild. The lion suddenly stopped, his body becoming as rigid as a statue carved from gold. He let out a low, mournful moan that vibrated through Thorne's very bones. It was a sound of absolute despair, a king's lament for something lost. Thorne stepped up beside him, his breath hitching in his throat as he looked down into the hollow where the shadows were deepest and the air smelled of iron. Ahead, the brush was trampled and broken, as if a great struggle had taken place. The lion nudged a low branch aside with his muzzle, revealing a hidden clearing. Thorne's hand tightened on the handle of his medical kit. He knew, even before his eyes adjusted to the dim light, that they had reached the end of the journey and the beginning of a desperate, high-stakes battle against the cruelty of man. Chapter 3. The Silver Serpent. In the center of the clearing, sprawled in the tall silver grass, lay the lioness. She was a vision of fading majesty, her golden hide coated in a layer of gray dust, and her breathing coming in ragged, shallow whistles. She looked like a fallen queen, her dignity stripped away by the cold, mechanical malice that held her captive. Her eyes were clouded with pain, flickering toward Thorne with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. Twisted around her throat, and one of her powerful forepaws, was a silver snare, a wicked, reinforced cable that seemed to glow with a cold, unnatural light in the gloom. It wasn't just a trap. It was a silver serpent, a strangler that tightened with every frantic movement she had made to free herself. The wire had bitten deep, creating a raw, cruel ring that stood in stark contrast to her beautiful fur. The male lion paced in a restless, agonizing circle around the clearing, his massive paws thumping the earth like a rhythmic drum of despair. He couldn't help her. His own immense strength only made the snare tighten further when he tried to pull at it with his teeth. He was a prisoner of his own power, forced to watch his mate slowly succumb to the metallic bite of a world he didn't understand. The air in the clearing smelled of ozone, rust, and the sharp, metallic tang of fear. It was a place where the magic of the wild had been interrupted by the cold logic of a machine. Thorne knelt at the edge of the grass, feeling the male lion's eyes boring into the back of his head. The beast was a coiled spring of tension, ready to protect his mate from even the smallest perceived threat. Thorne realized that the snare was a professional's tool, designed to be unbreakable and unyielding. It was a piece of man-made malice that didn't belong in this sacred space. Each time the lioness tried to lift her head, the silver serpent cinched a fraction tighter, stealing another sliver of her life. The silence of the forest now felt like the silence of a courtroom, waiting for a verdict. He reached into his kit and pulled out the steel cutters, the cold metal feeling heavy and significant in his palm. He looked at the male lion, and for a heartbeat, they were equals, two guardians, facing an enemy that neither could defeat alone. The lion stopped his pacing and lowered his head, a silent acknowledgement that the fate of his queen now rested in the hands of a human lawman. Chapter 4. The Mercy of the Blade. Thorne moved into the red zone, a space where a lion's reflex is 10 times faster than human thought. He could feel the heat radiating from the lioness's skin, a furnace of life that was slowly flickering out. Her pulse was thrumming beneath her hide, erratic and faint, like the fluttering wings of a dying bird. One wrong move, one sudden snap of a twig, and the male lion's instinct to protect might override his plea for help. In a moment of supernatural trust, the male lion went perfectly still. He stood like a sentinel of stone at the edge of the clearing, his amber eyes fixed on Thorne's hands. The atmosphere grew electric, charged with a tension so thick it felt like walking through water. Thorne leaned in, the smell of wild musk and dry earth filling his lungs, as he positioned the cutters against the first silver coil. The first snip of the wire rang out like a gunshot in the silence of the clearing. The lioness flinched, a low growl vibrating in her throat, but the male let out a soft huff, a command for her to remain still. Thorne's hands were steady, though his heart hammered against his ribs with enough force to bruise. He was working against a ticking clock, his own sweat dripping onto the metal of the snare. He had to work with surgical precision. The wire was cinched so tightly around her throat that he had to slide a small wooden wedge beneath the cable to protect her windpipe. It was a dance for the predator, a delicate negotiation between the blade and the skin. With every strand he severed, he felt the weight of the king's debt growing, a silent pact being forged in the dust of the clearing. The silver serpent was stubborn, its reinforced core resisting the steel cutters with a screeching metallic defiance. Thorne gritted his teeth, his muscles aching from the awkward position. He whispered words of comfort to the lioness, his voice a low, steady hum in the quiet. He wasn't just cutting wire. He was trying to undo a crime, to restore a balance that had been violently disrupted. Finally, only one strand remained, the primary loop that held her life in its grip. Thorne took a deep breath, looking into the lioness's amber eyes. She seemed to understand. She went perfectly limp, surrendering her life to the mercy of his blade. With a final, agonizingly slow squeeze of the handles, the silver serpent was broken, falling into the grass like a discarded ribbon. Chapter 5. The King's Debt. The tension that had held the lioness in a death grip vanished instantly. For a long, terrifying minute, she didn't move. She lay in the grass, her ribs heaving as the oxygen flooded back into her lungs, purging the shadow of the snare from her body. Thorne scrambled backward, giving the predators their space, his hands shaking as the adrenaline finally began to ebb away from his limbs. Then, a shuddering breath filled the clearing. The lioness's amber eyes fluttered open, the cloudiness replaced by a sharp, piercing clarity. She rose to her feet, a slow and majestic movement that felt like a mountain rising from the plains to meet the sky. She shook her mane, sending a cloud of dust into the air, and for the first time in hours, she let out a low, resonant purr that shook the very ground. The male lion stepped forward, his massive head rubbing against her shoulder in a gesture of profound, wordless relief. They stood together, a wall of gold and raw power, two sovereigns reclaimed from the edge of the dark. The forest seemed to exhale with them, the wind picking up again and the birds returning to their chatter as the ancient order was restored. They turned their attention to Thorne. The lawman stood his ground, meeting their long, heavy gaze. It was a look that seemed to peel back his soul, acknowledging the spark of courage that had allowed him to cross the threshold. There was no growl, no threat, only a deep, vibrating silence that felt like a royal audience. The debt was acknowledged, not in words, but in the gravity of the stare. Without a sound, the male lion inclined his massive head in a slow, deliberate bow, a royal salute from a king of the wild to a guardian of the earth. It was a moment of impossible grace, a sign that the pact was complete. Then, as if they were made of the very shadows they walked through, the two lions turned and vanished into the green sea of the forest, moving with a fluid, silent speed. Thorne was left alone in the clearing, the broken silver snare at his feet, a cold reminder of the morning's battle. He looked at his hands, still stained with the dust of the savannah and the rust of the wire. He knew that the valley would never look the same to him again. He had seen the king's mercy, and he walked back to his cottage, knowing that in the deep emerald gloom, a sovereign lived, who would never forget his name. The king has regained his throne, and the silver serpent is broken. If this legend of honor and impossible mercy touched your heart, join our pride by hitting that subscribe button and ringing the bell. We share daily cinematic stories of animal heroism that you won't find anywhere else. Don't let the mystery end here.